Hello, good morning. My name is Brian Smith. I'm the Customer Engagement Manager here at Samsara. I'm really excited to have you on the phone here today. What I'd like to walk you through is an onboarding deck of an introduction to Samsara. As we're in week one of the mandate, I want to make sure that everyone's prepared and understands how to get the most out of the dashboard and has a forum to ask questions. So what we'll be doing today is I've got some support here from Jonte from our compliance product manager, as well as Patrick from our support team. They'll be helping field questions. The line will stay muted throughout the entire session, but I encourage you to write in questions using the question feature at the very bottom of GoToWebinar. And then with whatever time we have remaining in the session, hopefully we'll have a good amount, we'll leave the line open and we'll answer the questions you have. So it's really intended to be a presentation that walks you through the highlights, as well as a time for you to ask any questions that occur. Setting expectations for the rest of the week, we will be holding this session at the same time on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And we will also be sending out a copy of the deck. So if you miss anything, you'll have a copy of today's deck that you can share with the rest of your organizations. And with all the introduction out of the way, I'll get started. So as an agenda, I want to hit three major points. I want to talk through installations and tips and how best to plan for installations. Talking about what your drivers need to know about managing hours of service, and then also what managers need to know. I'll also apologize in advance. Across the spectrum of attendees on the board, some of you will be through some of these steps, some of you will be brand new. The intent is that we cover everything, and then as I said before, you kind of send in questions as they occur, and we'll tackle them in order. So the very start of the process is activating your hardware. So after your purchase, your hardware is provisioned. I'm speaking specifically for gateways in this case, but it will apply to all gateways and sensors. Your hardware is provisioned, and you will receive an email outlining all the hardware that you will be sent. The best advice and the one tip that I can offer for this step is to utilize the activation link that comes with it and instantly activate all of your hardware. The best practice is to activate your hardware so that it appears in the dashboard, and what you'll see on that page is then a list of all of your gateways and their current connectivity status. Then, once you move on to do your installation, you'll be able to perform an inventory of every gateway that goes into every vehicle. One thing that is very easy to run into is after you perform your activation to install all of your gateways, but not keep a tight record of where each gateway has gone, which can then necessitate going backwards and having to kind of do that in reverse. And so it's a very easy step to miss, but it's really important to, at the outset, get in the habit of inventorying all of the gateway information that you've loaded in your dashboard, and then install those gateways per your inventory list. Once installed, the light next to your gateway ID will turn green. You can give it the name of the vehicle you installed it into and move forward to the next vehicle. I also, over here on the right, have a graphic of the cable options between our light duty and heavy duty installation cables. This is more of a guide. You can always reach out to your account rep or support for cable selection, but we're also always here to help. The last bit of advice that I want to mention is that in the event that you're in a scenario where you perform your installation and you see your dashboard starts flashing, you see issues with that, it is more than likely an issue with the cable selected. And again, you can reach out to your rep or support, and we'll help swap that out for the cable you need to finish your installation. For those of you who are still in the process of choosing a mobile device, Samsara here, we recommend two choices depending on the environment you prefer. In terms of Android, we recommend the Samsung Galaxy Tab A, and then for iOS, we recommend the iPad. We could go a lot deeper on mounts, powering systems, that kind of thing. Those are things that I won't handle on this presentation because I think they're more specialized to what your needs are. But as you start thinking about how you want to mount your devices, we can help you with that information. But at a high level, if you're still in the process of figuring out what device you need, these are two great, simple options that work very well with our software package and our driver app. The next part that I want to talk about is the Wi-Fi hotspot. And I want to spend some time here because it's a feature that's available to you that I don't often see taken full advantage of. So for all the gateways that you've purchased, you do have the option of enabling a Wi-Fi hotspot that provides Wi-Fi to your tablet and any other devices that you wish to grant access to, and it's one hotspot per gateway. When setting up your Wi-Fi hotspot, it's as simple as going into Settings and then into General, and in the top right, you'll see Wi-Fi hotspot for vehicle gateways. Right here in the graphic, I have it enabled. It'll be disabled initially. If you pick Enabled, all you'll then need to do is select an SSID and a passphrase, and that will basically enable your Wi-Fi hotspot. Best practices are to pick something simple that's easy to remember. This one password will apply to all of your devices. And so when you're then provisioning them, you want it to be something simple, straightforward, easy to remember. You have the option for passphrases of 8 to 63 characters. And then I believe I mentioned earlier, but it's worth stressing that you have 500 megabytes per month of free Wi-Fi through this device. This can be very helpful in scenarios where maybe the carrier that you use for your mobile device doesn't have coverage, but the gateway does. It's just a really easy, straightforward solution. Comes out of the box with the system, no extra cost, and can be really good for help keeping your data uptime high. The only part that I'll mention for this page is in the event that you go over 500 megabytes, the usage or the signal is throttled but not cut off. And so typical use cases you'll never go over, but in the event, you can still operate per normal when you hit that limit. Following up on getting your devices, getting the Wi-Fi set up, is just getting the app. And so a lot of times it's not always clear where to get the app. And so it's very simple. Whether you've picked an Android or an iOS device, you can simply search Samsara driver, and that will get you to the proper location in either the App Store or the Google Play Store. It's then just as simple as downloading the app, just installing the app, and starting to use it. It's very straightforward, but Samsara driver is what you'll want to search for in either of those stores for downloading a new version of the app. It's also worth mentioning that once you've downloaded it once, you'll rarely need to ever reinstall that again. We perform over-the-air updates of firmware in the background, and so when those occur, the driver will likely log in. The screen will flash requiring a second login. That's us updating the system, but there's nothing wrong with the system other than new firmware is being downloaded. A second attempt will allow them to gain access, and that's how we perform updates. So there's rarely a need for you to actually go to the App Store and get the latest version. Once you have it, we'll be there to help keep you current. And in the event that you need a new version, you'll get a notification from us. Another part of the setup that I want to call out while you're getting ready to provide your drivers with gateway with mobile devices is setting up your fleet ID. So part of the login process for a driver is to supply a fleet ID, a username, and a password. We'll get to the username password in a little bit, but in setting up your fleet ID is located on the general page, and then you can see mine right here. It's a couple of blocks down in the middle of general under settings. Your fleet ID will be set by default and will be made as best the system can out of a combination of your name. But if there's an acronym you prefer, something shorter, something more memorable, before you even go about provisioning your tablets and setting up drivers, it's really helpful to pick the fleet ID that works best for you. That way, when drivers are logging in, they don't necessarily need to remember the full name of your org with hyphens or however it ends up being auto-generated. They can use the fleet ID as you've selected it. Once you set that fleet ID up, you only need to set it up once. Once it's a standard, it'll appear on the driver app every time the driver logs in. But it's important and a really easy step to save some time to, in advance of distributing tablets, setting up users to configure that fleet ID. Setting your DOT information. So we'll cover this in a couple places during the presentation, but the information that's presented on your driver's logs is sourced from a combination of this hours of service DVIR page and the driver information that you load up when you create drivers. So under settings, under hours of service DVIR, this outside of the general page is where you'll set up all your specific information. So when your driver presents their logs during inspection and it shows who the carrier is, the main address, and the DOT number, that information is loaded up on the hours of service DVIR page. It's not on the general page, as not all customers are subject to ELD. but it's here in hours of service DVIR. Once you set it up once, you won't need to change it again, but it's important to know that this is where this information sits. We'll get to it in a slide or so, but in the event that you have multiple DOT numbers that you want to service, you can set up a default DOT number, an initial or primary that applies to most of your drivers, and then I'll show you shortly that for each driver, you can set an individual DOT name, address, and number that applies just to that driver. So that's how we support multiple DOT numbers within the system. Setting up drivers occurs under settings, under drivers, and as you can see also from the drivers page, there is a view of what your current fleet ID is. So while you're setting up drivers, it's another place where you can see your fleet ID. Hitting change takes you back to general unless you change that. But you have two options in setting up a driver. So depending on how many drivers that you have to actually operate with, you can select add new driver or click edit, and that will pull up a screen that lets you add or manage one driver at a time. You can pick their name, enter phone number information, username, password, all of that one at a time. You also have the option, however, of utilizing the bulk update, which allows for a download and a re-upload of all of your drivers. The bulk operation can be really helpful, especially after you've added a driver or two. What it'll allow you to do is you can download your entire list. It'll provide you a unique ID for each driver, but it will then give you like a spreadsheet of all the columns that you can configure. So if, in my case, I have 4 drivers here. If I were to export all of their information, I could update their username, I could change I could change their password, I could change their DOT information if I wanted to update that information to be different from the default. And as long as I don't change the ID that comes with that information, I could then re-upload that list and only make the changes from that list to all of my drivers. So it's a really easy way to go in and make bulk changes. Or if I want to add in one driver and then use that as a template for all the other drivers, I can add in that one driver manually, and then I can upload all of my other drivers following the same format that I did for the first driver. I mentioned earlier that drivers can be saved using a username and password. However, just like with setting up the hours of service DOT page, there are a number of pieces of information that are not required to save, but are required for the mandate. So as part of the mandate, you're going to want to have some critical information over here on the left to be presented on the driver's logs. So name, straightforward, but you're also going to need to have the license number for that driver, as well as the license state of issue. So that'll be required because when they show that inspection page, it'll show that information. If it's not loaded in, it'll be blank. Also for usernames are required to be a minimum of 4 characters, and then obviously for access, a password is also required. So if you think about what you need to have at a bare minimum when you do your upload of drivers, this is the bare minimum of information that you need to have. If you want to add a phone number, that's all the better. We'll talk in a bit about personal conveyance and yard move. These are statuses. That's all that you can add. But this is the bare minimum of what you want to have in the system for making sure that a driver can present their logs effectively. At the very bottom of the driver settings page, you have the ability to configure personal conveyance and yard moves. And so for personal conveyance, these would be scenarios where, and within the mandate, they're optional duty statuses where a driver is able to drive considered off-duty, not driving, when they are driving a company vehicle that's tracking engine runtime for personal reasons. So if they're off-duty for the day, maybe a meal on the way home, but they have to operate their company vehicle that's tracking runtime, you can enable them to utilize personal conveyance. It's basically a setting in the background. So on a one-off basis, and this screen is just a full view of the full driver page. It's actually longer than one screen would show. But if you scroll down past password, you have the option of toggling personal conveyance. So for every driver that you think would need this status, they have the ability to use personal conveyance once you enable it. And then in terms of the way that personal conveyance works, it's at the discretion of the driver. So you make this available to drivers who will need it, and they will apply it as necessary. The same thing applies to yard move, which would be scenarios where if a driver is simply repositioning vehicles around your personal private property, they're not driving for the purpose of hauling, or anything along those lines. It's not subject to the mandate and taking their hours in terms of drive time. For yard moves, they can be considered on duty, not driving. And again, it works the same way. On an individual basis, you can give a driver access to the yard move duty status, which they can then use at their discretion. One other part that I want to mention about the yard move duty status and personal conveyance is the driver needs to select these statuses before they move the vehicle. And then each time they stop the vehicle, they need to select it again. It's more specific to the mandate that it works this way, but they need to be able to elect in advance that the trip they're about to take is for the purposes of personal conveyance or yard move. And then the last part that I want to bring up on this page is just the overrides I mentioned earlier, where at the very bottom here, this is where for a driver, you can override and use a different carrier name, address, or DOT number specific to that driver if it doesn't apply to the default one you put on the hours of service DVIR page under settings. For adding new users, so we've talked a lot about getting the hardware in, getting tablets in, getting drivers set up, but you also need to think about who has access to the system, who can make changes. I think most urgent for this call is, who can touch logs, who can make edits, who can run reports, those kinds of things. So the way that the system works, if you want to ever add a new user, you can go to Settings and Admins. At the very bottom of the page, you have Add an Organizational Administrator. This currently works on a one-off basis, so there is no bulk function. But what you're able to do here is enter an email address and then select from the available roles. Most typical roles that will be utilized will be full administrator, read-only administrator, and maintenance. In this case, a full admin is able to see everything and edit everything. A read-only admin is able to see everything, but not make edits to anything, no changes. And then from a maintenance perspective, they're able to see the Fleet Viewer page and the Maintenance tab. So the maintenance user setting is really ideal for fleet maintenance teams, mechanics. When they log in, they're not inundated with all the other information on the dashboard. They can just use the map to basically see where vehicles are when they have issues or they need to follow up, and they're able to manage DVIRs. We won't explicitly be covering DVIRs in this presentation, but if there are questions, we will make time to walk through that. One other caveat that I'd like to mention is the usage of tagged admins. So we won't dig into tags in this presentation either. I want to keep the deck pretty consistent, pretty concise, so we have time for questions. But if you are utilizing tags within your system, you do have the ability to create users that only have access to those tags. So you would manage tags under Settings and Tags. You would create a tag, which is basically any name calling out a certain vehicle type, certain route, and those tags can be applied to drivers, vehicles, and they shape the view that that user sees in the dashboard. At the same time, if you are an administrator under tags, you do not have the same full access that an administrator over the entire org sees. You have access to the Fleet Viewer page, you have access to alerts, but what you don't see is the Support tab or Settings. Because you have a restricted view, you're not able to see all of the cases that come in for the entire organization. And because you have that restricted view, you're not able to go to Settings and make all the updates that could likely impact the entire org. So again, if there are questions about user setup, we can definitely handle those. But that's the difference between having a full admin and a tagged admin. It can be useful to restrict someone's view, but just know that a tagged admin doesn't have the ability to change all of the settings for their location the way an org level admin may. Covering everything for installs, I'd like to then go to managing hours of service for drivers. So the intent of this entire section is to walk through all the things that drivers need to know about the system and getting the most out of it. So I'll spend a good amount of time here. I'll acknowledge that this forum is not great for circling up drivers, so hopefully you can share this information with them. Again, we'll be sharing the deck, but this is what I want you to know that your drivers need to know to be effective in the app. Logging in. So the first thing to know is that all of the administration for the driver app needs to be done from the dashboard. We try to provide reminders on the app towards the bottom, but there is no functionality for drivers to reset their own passwords. You have authority to create drivers, create usernames, create passwords, and then edit all that information. So in that vein, just like when selecting fleet IDs, it's helpful to pick simple usernames and simple passwords. This is just a reminder on the fleet ID that it's automatically set up and should be configured. You can change these from settings and drivers, as I mentioned before, and in keeping these simple, it can be really useful to follow conventions like first initial, last name, employee ID. As long as the username is more than 4 characters, that username qualifies. It's also possible that you might want to adopt a situation where the username and the fleet ID are the same. For the more drivers you're managing, the more you'll want to keep things simple and straightforward, because if they're having issues logging in, they have to go to an administrator to get that fixed. And so the recommendation is to keep them short, keep them memorable, link them to a number they probably already use within your organization. And in that way, you can kind of keep the login process simple for drivers, especially as they're getting up to speed in the system. The last part that I wanted to mention on this page is something that I said a couple slides earlier when we talked about downloading the app. When you download the app for the very first time, you'll get an initial version from the App Store or Google Play Store. The driver will log in, or whoever's provisioning the tablet will log in for the first time, and they will be kicked from the system seemingly. It'll flash, they'll be in, and then they'll have to log in again. This is expected behavior. What has basically happened is they've logged in, the system has seen that it needs an update, it makes a firmware update, and it requires a second login. It can look as if the login has failed, doesn't work. Just give it a second try, and that'll be the last time you need to do that for that install. Going forward, firmware updates will happen in the background, and you'll have that one login. But it can be one part of the experience that is jarring and thinks, well, maybe I'm not doing something right. No, you're doing fine. You've done everything right. And as a user, as a driver, or whoever's setting those tablets up initially, you just need to log in one more time, and then you're all set. Beyond that, if the driver or user using this tablet uses the same tablet day after day, you're not changing tablets between drivers, the app will remember your fleet ID, and they will remember your username. So going forward, if you have a situation where the same person has the same tablet every day, they really just need to memorize their password. Everything else will be saved from the last login. So vehicle selection. So the driver, when they first log in, will get a reminder of any uncertified logs that they have. They can either go in and click Review and Certify. This will let them look at all the previous days, and they can certify all at once. For anyone new to the system, you will get a pop-up that says you have 8 days of uncertified logs. This is just because we have the 8-day window. It's their first time logging in, and so there's no information for that log. And so they'll say I have 8 days of uncertified log. That's okay. Drivers can simply move forward from the day that they first start using the system. So they're not behind in any way. It's a pop-up that everyone gets the first time. It's just because the system is looking back 8 days, and this is the first time the driver is actually logged into the system. In terms of vehicle selection, for my example here, my organization only has one vehicle, but your drivers will be able to see every vehicle within your organization. Even if you're utilizing tags in your system, tags apply to what is seen in the dashboard. So your users, your administrators, they can run reports, they can select various views in the dashboard based on tagging drivers or tagging vehicles. But for the driver's experience, they see every vehicle that is available to them in the org. In terms of navigating to a certain vehicle, if you have 10 vehicles, 15 or so, it can be very easy to scroll to the vehicle that they want. If you have more, the recommendation is that they use the search feature. That way, if they're getting vehicle ABC12, they can just type that in up top. It's a very quick search, and it's a much more reliable way to get the vehicle that they want without scrolling through all the vehicles to search for it. Another part that I'll mention as part of the vehicle selection process is as drivers get used to the system, as it's still new, as they're figuring it out, there will be occasions where they pick the wrong vehicle. Either they miss the one they want, or it's just, accidents happen, especially with new systems and you're figuring it out. So at any time, both immediately after or later the day, if they just need to switch vehicles, you can change vehicle by clicking the vehicle button after you've logged in. Once you've picked a vehicle, you land on this screen. By clicking vehicle, they can then get the pop-up screen for vehicle selection to come again, and they can select a different vehicle. So in the event that they make that mistake, they can change that later. We'll cover this a bit later in the management portion, but in the event that they drive in that vehicle and they need that change, that is a change that an administrator needs to make. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but in terms of editing past vehicle selection, that is a change that a manager will make from the dashboard, and we'll see what that looks like. One part that I want to talk about real quickly is team driver. This won't apply to everyone on the phone, but I do want to talk through how the process works. So team driver covers scenarios where imagine you are performing a training where you have a driver who's learning and a trainee and a trainer in the same situation, or maybe you have multiple drivers who haul at once. One sleeps while the other drives. In either scenario, you'll want two drivers to be in one vehicle. In this case, team driver allows both drivers to log into one tablet for one vehicle and manage their hours. So I'll go through the process flow really quickly. It's extremely straightforward, but I have a couple slides to show what that looks like. So if you imagine how the scenario would work, driver one logs in. You can see that they're driver one because their username's up top and the vehicle selected. They'll then click team driver or driving team, at which point the second driver will pick add user to driving team and add themselves. You'll then have a view where you have the initial driver and the secondary driver. The initial driver up top here has given the second driver a current vehicle, made the second driver the current driver. This means that when the vehicle moves, we'll talk about duty sets in a bit, but when the vehicle moves, this is the driver who gets that runtime. By clicking set as vehicle driver, we've made Jay Smith, in this case, the current driver. And then if we were to hit select view app on driver account, we could also look at Jay Smith's account. And so now in this case, Jay Smith is the primary driver. We're looking at his logs, and he's also considered the current driver. So again, if the vehicle moves, we would add runtime to his log. It's really straightforward, but that's ultimately how that works. You can add a new driver, one or several, and then it's a matter of making a primary driver who accepts the duty status, the auto duty drive time when the vehicle moves, and then which log do you want to view? Who needs to present their logs? Who needs to edit their logs? Who's performing the DVIR? All of those things would be covered by deciding which account you wanted to view that way. Then the last bit that I want to talk about for team driver is signing out. So if you have two or more drivers as part of this driving team, it's important to know that when you sign out, when any one of these drivers signs out from their view, you sign out everyone. The team ends. And so if other drivers need to continue using that vehicle or go on duty, they need to sign into that vehicle or another vehicle to go on with the rest of their day once that initial driver leaves. So now I want to talk about how drivers manage hours of service within the app. And so there's a couple things that I want to guide you through. So after the driver's logged in, team driver or not, they'll manage their hours of service from the hours of service button. They can change their duty status manually. Up top here, you'll default to being off duty initially, unless you start a DVIR, which will require you to go on duty. And then in understanding the rings available, you basically have three options where we count down the time until your break, the remaining shift time, and the remaining cycle time. Everything that a driver needs to present during inspection is behind this DOT inspection button, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And then in terms of actually managing past logs, drivers can navigate to past days by clicking any of the days down here. If they have red pencil marks, they haven't been certified yet, the driver can still edit those. If they have green check marks, then they've been certified already. This means that any edits that need to happen have to happen from the manager's side. Drivers are not able to edit certified logs. You'll see later that they can approve edits of certified logs from their managers, but they can't edit them anymore. Once they certify, that locks direct edit from the driver. The other part of advice I'll give is in terms of these break, shift, and cycle time, most importantly for the break, for those of you, for the drivers who have to manage that 30-minute break, the system itself does not provide a visual countdown for the 30 minutes that they're on break. It's up to the driver to make sure that they're keeping track of how long they've been on break and making sure that they go over the 30 minutes. Because if they move the vehicle and they haven't, they'll need to take another break to stay compliant. And so the advice I would give is that, if they have a watch, some other means of time, just use that to record, and it's down to the second. So, a 31-minute break is not a bad bit of advice, just to make sure that they're sure that the next time they move that truck, they've actually had their full 30-minute break. I've talked a bit about the automatic driving status. This is a portion of the mandate that is required, and so I want to spell out why it works the way it does. So the mandate requires that whenever the vehicle goes above 5 miles an hour, that the driver of that vehicle has to automatically put in the driving status. This can be really important because that means that the correct driver needs to be assigned to that vehicle. If one of your drivers forgets to log out at the end of the day and the system thinks they're in the vehicle, that drive time will show up on their logs. It's required that they be put into driving. So whether they're on duty or off duty, regardless of the status, if the system thinks that they're signed in and the vehicle moves, they'll be given that drive time. So it's really important that drivers are in the correct vehicle and sign out completely when they're done with the day. And I'll repeat that a bit later. On the driver's behalf, though, there's also functionality that checks to make sure the driver is still driving. So if the driver stops, they don't touch their duty status, they will get a pop-up that asks if they're still, that lets them decide are they still driving, or they can say they're still driving, or they can elect to go off duty or on duty. In the event that they ignore or miss this pop-up, they will automatically go on duty. So that's a way in which, even though we're required to give driving time, it's also required and something we provide where they will go on duty when it's clear the vehicle is no longer in motion. Another part that I want to address that comes up often is just how the alerting system works. And so alerts to the driver, along with just managing the time here, there are a number of cues that drivers will get while they're managing their hours of service. So for each of these rings here available, when the driver gets within 30 minutes of the time running out, these bands will turn yellow. When they hit 0, they will turn red. At the same time, both 30 minutes in advance and when they go into violation, there are in-app pop-ups that will show when a driver is approaching a particular violation. In terms of setup, this happens automatically. There is, you can add driver phone number to their account and everything. This is not an SMS text. This is not part of anything else in the driver setup. This is part of app functionality. So this will come out by default. But when you talk to drivers about what they'll see or what's presented to them to help them manage their hours, they both get the visual cues of the rings changing colors, as well as the in-app pop-ups that let them know which violations they might be heading towards or have recently entered. The next part I want to talk about is editing of logs. So drivers can edit their logs if they're not certified by either clicking the log button or picking a particular day. They can click the graph, which then brings up a UI that lets them pick a start time, an end time, and pick an appropriate duty status. Once they pick this status, they are required to add a remark to that status. If they simply save the edit, they'll get a pop-up, it'll ask for a comment, they'll have to make that change. It's also worth mentioning what can and can't be changed. So drivers are not able to edit away drive time. They can update it to be personal conveyance and yard move if you've enabled that to their account, but they cannot erase drive time. So if they go in to make edits, maybe they actually were off duty for some time limit for their break. It shows on duty. They forgot to change that. They can go in and change off duty to on duty, back and forth, that kind of thing. But they cannot erase drive time. So in terms of thinking what kinds of issues you've either seen in the past or will run into, if it's a matter of changing between on duty and off duty, these are things you can go to the driver with. You can say, you need to change this time frame. Once you change that and certify, everything's changed, or everything's all set. But if it's things like issues with runtime or issues with vehicle selection, those are things that managers will take care of, and we'll speak to that in a little bit. And then for certifying logs, drivers certify their logs from the same page that they edit on each log page. They can add remarks, but they'd ultimately hit certify, which brings up this required text on I hereby certify that my data entries and my record of duty status for this 24-hour period are true and correct. One part that's really important to talk about here is the 24-hour period. So a driver is allowed to certify that day midday. So you can see here there's an incomplete log. It's around 2:30 here. A driver could certify this log, but best practice would be for a driver to certify the following day, before they start work for the following day. They should really be waiting for the 24-hour period to complete so they can see how their log is built. You want to see a full day for them to review and to certify. Something that you'll see a little bit later is a requirement on driver approval of carrier edits. This requires that any edit made on the manager side be approved by a driver. If you're in a scenario where, as a manager, you want to make an edit, we don't advise that you force the driver to certify midday, knowing that the logs will continue to create later for the day, just so you can make that edit. Because you'll see the pop-up later, they won't be notified until a 24-hour period can be reviewed and a pop-up can be sent to update the information. So this will make a lot more sense when we get to it, but at a high level, best practice would be to wait for the 24-hour period to complete, a full day to complete, before a driver reviews and certify that log. That way, they only have to worry about once of looking at all the data, saying that it's correct, and then certifying that case. And then, in terms of how approval of carrier edits works, this is the driver's view. I'll show you the manager's view in a bit. But from the driver's perspective, at the end of the 24-hour period, they will get a pop-up that shows that they have pending edits that you made in the dashboard that they need to approve. In the example here, it's a simple time change of 11 hours, 15 hours, but this is what they would see. This is what they would approve after the pop-up. It's also really important that any edits that you want to make on a driver's behalf, make sure that you agree on an edit and talk about it with the driver. The system does not auto-report approval or rejection of carrier edits. So if you make an edit and have talked to the driver and they're confused by the edit, they disagree with the edit, you haven't actually talked about what that edit means, then you run the scenario of them rejecting the edit and you not knowing it's been rejected, and that's what appears in their logs. So it's basically coordination outside of the system that's a best practice for making sure that when you send an edit to a driver, they know it's coming and you both agree that it's something that needs to be changed. One part that I mentioned earlier, but I want to kind of call out and say again, is just the sign-out process. It's really important because of the way that the automatic driving status works, that drivers sign out of the app completely. If they don't sign out, they run the issue or they run the risk that someone else moves that vehicle, whether it be someone else running a route for a later part of that day, whether it be maintenance, moving the vehicle, someone else performing a yard move, whatever it ends up being. If someone moves that vehicle and the system thinks that your original driver 1 is still logged in, that's going to show up on their logs, and it becomes something that has to be edited later. So best practice is to make sure that they log out completely. You may want to kind of walk them through that step a few times. It seems heavy-handed at first, but it's a good thing to start training early, and then you don't have to go back and make edits to those logs. So now for the management portion. I know we're a little bit behind on time. I wanted to give you some more time for questions. Hopefully you're getting those in short order, and we'll run through this last portion before we open it up for all of us to answer any remaining questions. So for managers and options that you have, what do managers need to know about hours of service? One feature that our support team can help walk you through is the locking of tablets. So by default, any driver can get into any vehicle. But if you need help in locking one tablet to one vehicle, that is a feature that we can help enable for you. It's something that we won't go through on the line here, but it is something that we can kind of walk you through on a case-by-case basis. So feel free to reach out for that. In terms of everything else that a manager would need to do, managers manage hours of service from the hours of service report. They can also reassign from the unassigned hours report, and then they can look up any violations from the violation report. At a high level, managers own the responsibility of editing mistakes like wrong vehicle and managing approval of carrier edits, which is basically edits after a log has been certified. So if we talk about the reports one at a time, for the driver's hours of service report, this is the initial page you land on. This is a view of a fleet that I have set up, but ultimately what you have here is all of your drivers and all of their current statuses. So in terms of current statuses, you have all of the available duty statuses in terms of on duty, off duty, etc. But what you also have is a status of disconnected. If you see disconnected, what this means is that the tablet is currently not connected to our cloud. This can happen for a number of reasons. Maybe the phone's been turned off, maybe the driver swiped the app closed, or maybe the driver's in a location of poor connectivity. The way that the system works, though, is that when connectivity is reestablished, the data backfills and the logs can be recreated. So for anyone who's new to the system or has been in the system, you absolutely will see drivers that are disconnected, but that is okay. As long as they regain connectivity to the cloud, that information will repopulate. If you dig into a log, we'll show you what that looks like in a second, but if you look at a particular driver, you'll basically see a gray line that exists until the information can be backfilled. So the data is behind, but it's never lost. And that's something that can be confusing if you're looking for the traditional duty statuses, but that's where that exists. Beyond the regular duty statuses, you see how long they've been in that current status. If they're in a vehicle, which vehicle they're in, I want to go back still, which vehicle they're in. And in terms of vehicle name, this can be a really useful column because if the org you have set up is one where every driver should always be signed into a vehicle, if you just scan this report and you see that someone's not logged into a vehicle, you can give them a call and let them know, you started your day, you're 2 hours into your route, I can see that you didn't sign in. And then by doing that, you have less editing to do later. So it's a very easy way to just go through here and audit and make sure that everyone's in a vehicle like they're supposed to. And then here you have the same times available that they see on their mobile app. So time until break, remaining drive time, shift time, cycle time. There's an estimate on cycle tomorrow, as well as will they be driving in violation? So there's some future estimates on information to come later. So this is all designed to help you manage that time, seeing what's currently available and what they likely have available for planning based on where they are now. Also, if the background of this driver turns red or yellow, you have the same information that they have, that they are either nearing or in a violation. As you expand that view, so what I've basically done is clicked into a driver from the initial view. Going through this chart, you have all the information available to you that drivers can see. So you would have the driver's name listed here, the vehicles that they've been in. One part that can be confusing is these colors on here designate all the vehicles that they've been in. So in this scenario, we have a driver who was associated to a vehicle while they were off duty in the evening. They changed to this vehicle, 110065, and then they finished by driving this last vehicle here, 109664, before going off duty and not being in any vehicles. So as you think about reading these and get more familiar, I mentioned earlier it can be really important that drivers need to sign out of vehicles. A very quick check you can do is just look and see, are drivers in vehicles when they shouldn't be? When they're off duty for multiple days in a row, if you see a colored line below that off-duty time frame, you know that the system thought they were logged into a vehicle while they were off duty the entire time. And in the best case scenario, no one moved that vehicle, there's no drive time, and there's really no need to edit that. But these are things where you can look in and you can see that work can be done to make sure that when drivers are off, they're not associated with vehicles. And then below you have all the basic information on available shift time, drive time, any violations, and then the various statuses and time frames below. And there's a lot of functionality you can talk about on the dashboard in terms of exporting that information, expanding that view, poking between drivers, but I'll leave it at a high level for now. So as I mentioned earlier, in terms of edits, so managers can only edit certified logs. So you saw the edit button here, you can click edit, and from here you can change timeframes, but here with vehicle, you can say unchanged, or you can pick a new vehicle. So you can make your vehicle selection here. You can also then pick the duty status applies to that time frame. So on top of just what drivers have in terms of start, end, and duty status, you have the option of picking the vehicle. In terms of, I don't have it specifically on here, but for every edit that you save, you will get a pending edit button that will show up over here on the right. That basically means that the edit is currently pending and will stay as such until the driver approves that carrier edit that I showed earlier in the presentation. So you know what it looks like when the driver actually gets that. In terms of violations, so if the only interest in starting up is following up on violations, there is both a dedicated HOS violations report in the dashboard. This allows you to just, at a high-level view, look at one driver or several drivers over any time frame to see what violations have come in. Based on those violations, you can then go back to the driver hours of service report and make the edits as necessary, or advise the driver on to make those edits, whether they be on-duty, off-duty edits that the driver can make, or vehicle selection edits, or drive time issues, things like that that you need to assign. So that's how that works from here. And then the only other high-level information I'll give is you can go in here on a regular basis, view the different violations. You can check off driver certifications in case all you want to see are actually shift and brake related issues, but you can also set up reports. So by clicking in on this circle here, you can either export the report or you can schedule a daily or weekly report. So if the best workflow for your organization is that someone within your org receives a daily report on all the violations, or a weekly report and wants to follow up that way, you can set up that regular scheduled report from this page. And that can be an easy way to follow up on violations without having to remember to go into the dashboard to make that search each time. And then in terms of managing unassigned hours, so the mandate also requires that unassigned hours be managed on all vehicles. The way unassigned hours appear within the logs or during an inspection is that for every segment on a vehicle that does not have a driver assigned, at the bottom you'll have a list of unassigned hours. And what you're trying to do is manage those hours to be less than 60 minutes within a 24-hour period. So it's really important that if you have drivers who are driving multiple vehicles, aren't signing in, that unassigned drive time in a vehicle shows up on whoever is driving that vehicle when it gets inspected. So if one driver doesn't sign in, drives the vehicle for the day, the next driver takes that vehicle, goes out for their routes, if they have an inspection, the unassigned hours for that vehicle show up in that report because the previous trip wasn't assigned to a driver. So it's really important to kind of stay on top of unassigned hours. The way that the report works is, from the unassigned hours report, you are able to click into a given vehicle and then view all of the trips associated with that vehicle. From here, you can assign that trip to whoever you know was in the vehicle at that time. So I don't have another pop-up here, but ultimately it provides you with a list of all your drivers, and then you can assign the drive time to that driver. So it's a very easy way to reassign that drive time and not leave it stranded on vehicles to show up during inspections. So that's everything that I wanted to discuss in terms of a high-level overview of how to get started with installs, managing tablets, setting up users, all the responsibilities and functionality available to a driver, all the responsibilities and functionality available to a manager. A couple things that I want to mention before we kind of just go to open questions is there is a knowledge base that we have hosted up on the internet where you can go here. We have videos, FAQs, information posted that you can share with the rest of your organization that helps you get prepared for the mandate. There's a video specific to managing the driver app that goes into a lot more detail than we were able to go to today. It's a really helpful resource there. There's also access to Samsara Docs. On Samsara Docs, you basically have all the information we have in terms of not only offering, but product information, cable information, install guides, all of that is available on Samsara Docs. And then our support team is available to help you if this particular discussion was not sufficient, or if you have extra items that we don't get to after this discussion. So with that, I will end the presentation, and we'll take a look at any questions that we might still have outstanding.